committee meeting. Thank you for joining us from my fellow councilors, Pat Hogan. We have on the other end Patrona and Jimmy Monto. We also have, Marty Nave and Joe Majok. Sorry about that. So we're here this morning to discuss the $4 million that the board did, we as a council did approve, impacting this budget, this year's budget, for increases to address keeping, trying to sustain our employees in City Hall and the city of Syracuse in general. So we just want to address how these $4 million are being, the next steps. We already know that 1.67, I believe, has been distributed. And from here on, what's the plan? So with that said, one of the things that employees and people have approached us to answer, which is a question I'm gonna make. I'm not sure who would be the right person to answer that. It's how. So when we approved the $4 million for increases, does that mean we stepped away from the grades system that every employee accrues through their tenure with us? How does that work?
Morning, councilors. Corey Driscoll Dunham, Chief Operating Officer for the City of Syracuse. So we didn't do away with the grade system when we did the compensation study. It gave us a new framework in which to, have this, recategorized. So there were changes to the grade system, but nobody lost any longevity. Nobody lost anything along those lines. But we did restructure the grades and the classifications for positions.
So within that restructuring, so what happened? I mean, why are people asking this question then?
So which question?
If they're losing any, I mean, through the grade system, are they in loss due to the changes?
Mm-hmm.
Next year I will go to step 3.
Right.
So steps would generally be associated with union positions. Non-union positions, generally speaking, do not have steps.
I see. Okay.
So, and I think that's, part of the clarification for this conversation is, non-union versus union. Right. So, non-union, there aren't steps, there aren't some of the benefits.
So in non-union, there's none of that.
Did away with, right?
I mean, the only thing that changed would have been, what, the paid pursuant? Yeah.
Frank Caliva, the city's chief administrative officer. So there was one class of non-represented employees, counselor, that followed the CSEA contract. It had a variety of different names over the years, but it had come to generally be known as paid pursuant. So it was a small group of employees, maybe 40? Yeah, about 40 employees, not represented by a union, but who followed the pay practices of one of the union contracts, CSEA.
Like department secretaries, people.
That's
like
correct.
Correct.
That is the only group that had steps, et cetera. So it was about, out of over 200 non-represented employees, there were the small group of 40 that followed the union contract for a variety of reasons. It had just become the city's practice. That class was eliminated. All of the people in that class were kept whole. Nobody was set back, but they were all kept whole. Yeah. Yep. But we eliminated the following of the CSEA contract for that group of employees going forward.
Okay.
Because they weren't representative, they lost. I mean, they could expect an increase in pay in the anniversary of every year, right?
Correct. So they're now in the same compensation framework as the rest of their colleagues who are not represented.
Okay, and that was How were they informed of that? Just by a letter or what?
Yeah, they were good. They were sent by
You just
letter.
didn't.
Yeah.
You did inform.
Oh, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no question.
How many non-city employees are there, roughly?
Non-city employees, I'm sorry,
non-
Councilman.
Non-union.
Non-represented?
Apologize. Yeah,
In
non-union.
non-represented employees total is just over 200,
225,
about 250, thank you.
250.
About 250, and so about 40 of them were in this paid pursuant category.
So they mostly work within the administration at all? Are they appointees from the administration, or they work in other departments?
They work throughout the city.
Okay, so not all are appointees of the mayor?
Indirectly, yes, they are. They're all at-will employees, and at-will employees serve at the pleasure of the mayor.
Okay, so they don't have do they have an option if they want to join a union? Any of these non-union employees?
None of them are eligible to be,
Okay.
they're not, they do not serve in positions that are claimed by any of the unions.
Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm sorry, was there anybody?
Yeah, so clerk, I think it was there was no question that there were some employees of the council and of the clerk's office and the auditor's office that were not under our purview, right?
It wasn't on our purview, but you had us in there. So how did you actually put us in that classification?
You were part of the study. Those positions were part of the compensation study, but we did not feel, we let their employers know that the compensation study had happened, and here were the results of the compensation study, but the administration didn't feel that it was
Let's make
our,
clarification. You keep saying the compensation study, it
Yes.
was really a matrix. We got the study after prolonged asking, it was a matrix.
yeah, there's no question that the end result was a new compensation framework that took the form of a matrix, sure. But there was a compensation study that backed it, yes. I'm not sure, my recollection is that we said that you were not part of the implementation of the study. Yeah. Yeah. That it was not, that you were not part of the implementation, but the positions were, the council was not, the elected officials were not. We did the elected officials after the study had been completed. Correct. Yep. The clerk and the deputy clerk, yeah, yeah, yep, yep.
So Frank, if the study was not done, I guess my question, who did the study?
We contracted with an outside firm called HR Works.
Okay, and then they went and did the metrics. It's just
That's correct. They built a compensation framework.
okay within their already existing system. They did the analysis.
They did not. Well, I'm sorry. I should have let you finish the question.
So they did the analysis within the system they had. They didn't have to go outside anywhere else. They just. So when you talk about the study versus metrics, what's the difference?
I'm not sure I understand the question. They took our existing jobs and job descriptions, and they were not all in the best of condition for non-represented employees. So there was a considerable amount of time invested in building the organizational structure so that they could understand what position reports to what position is on the same level as other positions. There's a considerable amount of data prep that HR did here, and then HR Works did. And then they build what's called a crosswalk. So they looked at our titles and our job responsibilities and said, what positions out in the rest of the world match those positions? And they build that crosswalk, and then they build, to the President Hudson's point, they then build a matrix of compensation that matches based on job responsibilities and hierarchy and organizational chart.
Not to cut you off, but when you talked about job descriptions, some of those job descriptions were actually changed to fit the narrative, right?
No. There were job descriptions that didn't exist that were, but there was nothing changed to fit the narrative. I guess I would question that. There were updates made to them if they didn't exist, or if they existed in a form that was very old.
Right, well, there was some that didn't exist that you actually manipulated to fit the narrative you were trying to fit.
Yeah, I would suggest that's not the case, but
Frank, what was the qualifier for position to make it to this study? And because you referred to earlier that there were certain positions that didn't make it to this study.
all non-represented positions were included in the study.
Okay. Everything.
That is under the purview of the mayor.
So,
The elected officials were not initially included.
okay, because when we were looking at the projection of those of what each position should be compensated around, right? When we look at those, we as elected official were bound by that, and we were not part of that study. So how did we fall under that and be part of that? Because when we were looking at our salary, we were looking at that same metrics, and you're saying that we were not included in that.
Initially, you were not.
Right.
Elected officials were not. We went back to the consultant after the study had been completed in its initial draft form and asked for that to be included.
Was that extra cost or not?
I don't believe it was an additional cost, a small additional cost.
So it wasn't a part of the 34,900 and some change? Was that brought back to us for approval, or was that a discretion of the mayor?
Yeah, the approval, I think, was for a larger amount, so we were still
$4 million.
underneath that total approval.
We approved 4 million, right?
Right.
Well, you approved 4 million in the budget was set aside for any salary increases and negotiations.
Wait, have we spent that?
I'd defer to Director Rudd, not fully. Yeah.
Well, I think the director mentioned that some of that money would be allocated to the cost of living raises.
That's correct. We have.
So we set aside
Yep.
money for the study. We set
Correct.
aside money for what sprang out of the study.
Yep.
And now some of that other money is going to pay for the cost of living raises that we really didn't know about.
Yeah, Director Rudd would need to speak to exactly where the budgeting is.
Am I correct, Tim? I mean, that's, you know, that $4 million has got to go a long ways, I think.
Are we like 2.5 of the 4? If we were, yeah. I'm gonna go with 2.5. We probably spent of 4, but the COLAs were budgeted within each department.
They were already budgeted for each department.
So that salary money, when you see the budget, it's kind of the sum of all the current pay at the beginning of the year plus 3% for half the year.
And that was
So-
because you're a good budget director. You sort of assumed that this would happen, or?
Yeah, I think budgeting for COLAs is best practice. That's what we do for all the unions. If you don't
So
budget
decided
for
to
it,
do it
if you
for
don't
it.
budget, they don't tend to happen. It has to be in the budget. The budget goes to you. You all review it. You approve it. It's in there.
So then that means we got 1.7 left, if 2.3 has been spent?
I guess 1.5 is my math. If I
Okay, 1.5.
if I was right.
So then what you're saying is that the 3% increases were part of the 4 million?
No.
No,
It's the other way around?
they were
Oh,
already
okay.
budgeted.
So what's left to do with the 1.5 million? Where, maybe that's for you, Frank. Are there positions that haven't been fixed?
Well, I mean, part of the budget process is there's a mid-year estimate that we do, and it goes to the council by the middle of March, and that would look at, do we have any budget shortfalls, and do we have any surpluses? And I think this would show up as a surplus, and then we would most urgently need to cover any shortfalls with it. rather than just spend it on something else.
We'd have to act on a transfer of funds.
Yeah, so to spend it anywhere else, you'd have to approve a transfer.
Okay.
No, the 3% was across city employees or everybody, or no?
Well, the 3%,
non-union,
so
I mean non-union,
we budget
yes.
based on the collective bargaining agreements. So for all the union people, when they're in contract, we say they're going to get this change on January 1st, and we make sure the money is there. So this is us doing the same thing for non-represented. So we put 3% as of January 1st into each budget so that it's there to give. Because if it's not there, then they tend not to happen, and that creates the conditions where you have to do a correction.
You know, I just want to, I want to go back to steps a little bit, because taking the steps away, were those people that had the steps taken away, was money, they were part of the study, did they all get the raises that the other people did? And in lieu of them having their steps taken away or not?
Sure. I mean, if some of the results found that folks were actually above market, and so, you know, there is a separate arrangement for those folks
Which was
to
what?
compensate them so that they can catch up to being, you know, that they're currently above market until they're at market. But I mean, to have steps apply to only certain employees and not other employees just doesn't seem
No, but I mean, just letting them know about it, that this
right.
was going to be
I mean,
taken away
I
from
was
them.
at the time the notification happened, I was serving as Commissioner Parks. HR gave me a stack of letters to give to the employees. So, you know, the clerk's office aside, at least from a department level, letters were given to the department heads to distribute to the employees. So, you know, everybody got, you know, the clerk's office aside, because I don't know what happened in that situation, but for the departments, that's right.
See, that's interesting, because a lot of those folks I know take on extra responsibilities. They're all management confidential folks, secretaries and things like that. Sometimes actually help out with the running of the department. It's not dealing
So
fair with
if the department
employees.
head feels that the person is going beyond their job description,
And letters were sent in to that effect,
then
correct?
so HR said to department heads, take a look at these job descriptions. Before we even, you know, at the very beginning of the compensation study, HR said to department heads, look at your job descriptions. Does the work that these folks do match the job description? Because if not, then we need to revisit the job descriptions, because obviously they change over time. And, you know, and it's not the same process that we do in terms of job descriptions for union employees. So department heads had the opportunity to say, and some did, to say, hey, this employee, this job description really no longer matches what this person does. You know, and so at that opportunity, the department head could say, I don't need this particular position now, I need a different position. You know, but there are obviously consequences to that. But I mean, if people are doing work outside of their job description, that's something they should bring up to a department head so that we can address it. But having this kind of separate group of employees who are paid pursuant without any real, in my mind, rationale behind why those employees are paid
Well, the
pursuant, but not.
rationale is because they're matching up with the unions. I mean, traditionally, the union.
But why are they matched up with the unions, and why am I not matched up with unions? Why is a secretary in another department not matched up with the unions?
You're at a way higher pay scale than those people.
But I mean, there
And
are
you're
why.
also in the mayor, you know.
Why
you're
aren't the planners and NBD matched up with the unions? I mean, like if
Why-
we're going to do it to everybody, then we'd have to do it to everybody. But rather than do that, we have put my guess, based on working for the city in previous administrations, is that there was no framework to provide compensation, and so these paid pursuant positions perhaps were provided so that they at least had a framework. Meanwhile, the whole rest of the at-will employees were just completely, again, going 5 or 6 years without any increases in compensation. Rather than having this makeshift approach of creating a separate category of folks who are paid pursuant, why not have a framework that we can all abide by and that we all know and is predictable and reliable for at-will employees?
Traditionally, when the unions got a raise pursuant to their contracts, all the non-union people under many administrations got the same raise.
Correct. And you know, as well as I do, that there are also administrations where that did not happen at all.
Well,
and increases in compensation were given.
maybe that's not the right counselor to bring that up to.
Well, I'm just, you know, that framework might have worked for some period of time, but then we went a long stretch of time without that happening Meanwhile, people in at-will positions went long stretches of time without any increase in compensation.
Well, since our people who work for us, as Frank just said, were neglected in this, or not, maybe not neglected, overlooked, we'll say, I think maybe some of that money that we have left over should go to some of our secretaries. and people
Happy
who
to
work
engage
for
in a
us.
conversation about council staff, CRB, clerk, any,
Well, we'll engage in that conversation.
that sounds good. I'll
Well, that's
meet
back
you
to my
there.
original question, who's left to be adjusted?
Right.
What's left? And when I said, is there people left to be adjusted, you nodded yes. So who are those? What are those positions and why haven't we adjusted them yet?
So there's about 8 positions that have yet to be adjusted. The reason being is because we don't have a job description. We budgeted for them and they haven't been created yet with the county. So those are the only roles that haven't been looked at. We looked at everybody in all of the departments that report to and through council. Some of the numbers were adopted, some were not. So all of that data is there. We have it for all of your departments, and we can give that to you at any moment. We've discussed what council should be at. We've presented that. That is up for adoption, should you choose. But to Frank's point, the administration can't force you to adopt those.
So the balance of the 4 million would be to address those positions that have not been increased.
Yes, there's money there for that, absolutely.
So our little staff, they did not get the cost of living.
Correct.
Okay, so not everybody was addressed then. The cost of living was just done out, just the people that were so designated from the study,
Are we
correct?
talking about, well, we're talking about 2 separate things here. So are we talking about the
I love
compensation
talking
study,
about
or
2
we?
separate things. That's
Right,
what
we
I
just
do
can't
the
conflate
best.
them, that's all.
Yeah.
So are we talking about compensation study, or are we
Well,
talking about
let's talk
3%
about the
COLA?
cost of living. How was that allocated?
So again, the only people that we have authority to increase were addressed. We don't have the authority to tell CRB how to
You
change their
didn't have to
monies.
you didn't tell us that you were addressing everybody else either. I mean, the council.
So, I mean, the mayor provided COLA increases for the staff that he oversees. So if there is conversations that, we can say we sent emails, you can say you didn't see them. For the purposes of the meeting today, I don't think that's going to get us anywhere, so
And you
agree.
obviously, we have something to do with the budget too, so it would have been nice
which is
to
why
know.
when you approved, the $4 million, I
We
mean,
approved the study, right, but we didn't know anything about the cost of living.
it was a
Just money,
budgeted, I fully accept that in terms of transparency, we could have notified the council. At the same time, it's a budgeted expense that the mayor exercised his authority to provide
Right, and it
cost
was
of living
encumbered in
adjustments for the
and it
folks.
was encumbered in all the city departments.
So I mean, happy to engage in a further conversation about the council, the CRB, and the clerk's office.
Corey, why is there a lack of communication between the administration and union leaders? Because apparently there's a lack of communication. Here, we'll do this, but we don't communicate. Union reps, the rank and file are left out in the dark. There should have been better communication. I believe the administration should have better communication with the council.
Fair point.
And I'm not pointing any fingers, but there should be a better communication. Union, the council, that we can agree on something. We should be meeting, but we don't do it. Everything is just, oh, by the way, here we go.
I think you're right, Counselor, there's always room for improvement for communication. I will say that in terms of communication with labor leadership, we have a monthly labor management meeting with all the leaders of the unions, with members of the administration, with members of HR to try and work through these issues. But to your point, there's always room for improvement with communication,
Because the rank
absolutely.
and file, they live within our city.
Right.
They work hard. They work hard to put food on their tables, put their kids to school. When they get sick, you know what? Make sure you can, afford these bills. So sometimes we overlook those who drive our trucks, pick up the trash. Sometimes we overlook them, okay? We look down to them sometimes. We shouldn't be looking down to them. Remember, they are the ones who do the work that a lot of people would not do.
Understood.
And they work very hard. And I know you do. You
Yeah.
understand that.
I
We both
absolutely agree.
We both agree with that. But I think there should be a better communication.
That's a
What
fair point.
we are doing as counselors, we are not just representing the unions, we're representing the men and women, we're representing working families. Thank you.
Thank you. Marty, let me ask you this question. So the back-to-back 3%, going back to the 3% increase to the employees that had already received an increase, was that to get closer to match them with the market alignment, or
For
how-
non-union employees?
What was for the non-union? Yes.
Yeah, so for the non-union employees, the compensation study is, really a snapshot in time. So, at that time when the compensation study is complete, that's what, the market, what we think is a fair market value to be competitive in the market for certain positions. However, the market continues to change, and so we need to keep up with that. So to have this snapshot in time of, we think this is a competitive wage for this position, and then let 2 or 3 years go by without increasing that compensation, we're going to fall behind. So the only way to try and stay competitive, again, that compensation study is a snapshot in time. There needs to be cost of living adjustments to keep up with inflation and the way that the market will change, so that we can make sure we stay competitive.
So we all know what the 3% does, but my question is, with increasing back-to-back with the people that you had just increased salaries to, you back-to-back increased another 3%. Was that to reach that market rate, or was that because you just approved it?
So do you mean, where does the 3% come from?
No, and what I'm saying, if by raising that 3% additional
Yeah.
to the raises they had just received, was that to reach the market alignment, or was it just because you approved it?
Easiest way to explain it is the train was off the tracks from years of not getting any adjustments. The compensation put the train back on the tracks, and the 3% is to make sure we don't fall off the tracks again. So we are keeping things going in the right direction to make sure that we are not falling behind in years to come, not for what was adjusted in July. If that makes sense. So there was an adjustment in July, and then to keep things on track, because if we step back into what we were doing, which is not giving adjustments or COLAs to non-represented people, we fall back into that, it's going to end up being another massive adjustment. So to avoid another massive adjustment down the road, we keep up with inflation through COLAs.
And then what's the sustainability plan of keeping all these increases and COLAs, to continue to, roll out?
Yeah, so that's the plan, is to keep up, not necessarily 3%.
Yeah, but what's the sustainability plan of that? I mean, how do we sustain it? Because we have the $4 million that we used for that, they were approved.
Yep.
So that's done and over with.
Right.
Now, so how do we keep it up?
Yeah, so I mean, part of that will be through the budgeting process, and again, with union employees, we have contracts so that we know predictably what the COLAs are going to be. So the budget office has that certainty to plan years out of what the adjustments are going to be in the COLAs. For non-union employees, we've put this framework in place. The reality is we are still at will for the mayor. So the mayor, at least for the time that he's here, has said he will assess, the city's financial situation and determine what the COLAs will be. So it's not as if it's a guarantee for non-union employees of what or if a COLA will be given next year. And that's just the reality of the position that these at-will positions are in. But we need to be mindful that if we don't do that, and if we, to Rick's point, get the train off the track, we're going to run into likely a lot of the same problems that we've come to the council with before, where our pay is not competitive, we can't recruit folks. And so, so the idea is to, through the budgeting process, account for those COLAs same way as you do the rest of the workforce.
I mean, out of fairness, the unions don't really get cost of living. They get a set percentage inside the contract. The cost of living could go up way more inside that contract. And
Yeah, I mean, and we both negotiate that contract, we both sign that contract, the membership votes on the contract, so, that's something that we agree to.
Well, while we're talking contracts, there's, what is the strategy of the administration regarding a study for the unions?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit premature just because we don't know.
Well, I'm not advocating. I'm just saying, because we've heard this bandied about.
Right.
And I'm just wondering, is that going to happen?
So
And what is the end result if the study comes back saying they
Yeah.
deserve a raise? Are we going to open up contracts again?
So we have communicated to the unions that we're not committed to reopening the contracts at this point. It also depends on how the timing falls. So for 250 employees, the compensation study took about 11 months. We're figuring out right now, with the number of positions that we have that are represented by unions, what's the approximate timeline for that compensation study? Because Is it possible that the results come around the time that it's time to renegotiate the contracts? We don't know that. We don't know that answer.
Well, some of the contracts are 5 years. You think the study's
So-
gonna take 5 years?
So no. The majority of the contracts, I think crew leaders, CSEA, middle managers, and local 400, I believe, expire at the end of 2025. Is that right, guys? Yes. And so let's say we launch the study this coming July, and it takes 11 months to do the compensation study. That puts us at June of next year. We've got 6 months left in the contract. Does that become some information that we use for upcoming negotiations? Sure. But I mean, we have communicated that we're not committing at this point to reopen contracts.
And we talked to all the union, because, I mean, I think some of the unions, at least what I'm hearing, are pretty satisfied with the contract, and other ones aren't, correct?
I certainly would never try to speak on behalf of the unions.
Yeah, well,
our union
I'm just
leadership.
wondering what kind of legal jeopardy the city would have regarding opening up contracts if we do a study, because if we do a study and if we're gonna say no to opening up contracts, why do the study?
Well, I mean, I think, so to be fair, the unions haven't made a demand that we open up the contracts, and we're saying we're not committing to doing it. I
But
think
are you gonna propose a study to us, because we have to vote on paying for it?
So once we have the results of the study, there's going to be a whole host of conversations that we have with the council, with union leadership. Are we going to look at, how the grades might fall differently, given if compensation changes? There's a whole host of conversations that we're going to have with union leadership and with the council, once a compensation study is complete. But
That would be nice, having conversations.
I love speaking with you, Councilor Hogan.
I feel the same way about you.
Well,
Councilor Mayor, you had questions?
Corey, I got a couple of questions. The first one is, do we know exactly how many years we went without raising?
so
8 years?
Across the board. There were, as a member of the previous administration, there were, certainly increases in compensation that happened, as the situations arose, but across the board COLAs, I don't believe happened.
So I assume with that many years going without COLA raises and stuff, I assume that compared to other cities, as a city, we were really, really behind. So was the idea that with $4 million, we bump those people up to make it market rate, right?
Yeah, and I think-
And then moving forward, that 3%.
Try to stay competitive. Right.
Grew gradually. Okay.
Right,
Okay,
right.
right,
I mean, and we planned for, fortunately, we planned to be much more significantly below the market than we actually ended up being, which is good news. But that's the plan, is to try and, the ideal situation is that COLAs are provided so that non-union employees, those positions in the compensation, can stay competitive.
So that strategy has made us competitive at the moment, right? Okay. The other question for me is going back to the mayor salary discretion. So are you saying that between the mayors, between the council, the auditor, and the CRB, that the mayor has no jurisdiction over those individuals in terms of giving them a raise or not?
To my knowledge, I don't know if the mayor wanted to give the council staff an increase in compensation. It's really under his purview to do that. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but, I think also just out of a, I think the idea is that the council's oversight is obviously very clear for their staff. Same for the CRB. So I don't know, that if the mayor picked a certain employee out of the council office and wanted to give that person a compensation increase.
Because my understanding was, when it comes to raises, the mayor had discretion, right? And it's clear that not with other elected offices like the council auditor, and right? Now, for me, I thought last year within CRB there was a raise last year done by the mayor. If there's that.
But they're subcontracted.
Or if
aren't
the
they?
CRB, submits a budget for increase in compensation or additional positions, that's subject for the council to approve if that's the direction the CRB wants to go in terms of either, changing the compensation or increasing the number of staff members. But that's not a decision initiated by the mayor.
So the council has to approve, if the mayor makes a proposal to people in his inner circle for a pay raise, does it still go before the council?
If it's in the budget, it doesn't require council approval.
Okay, thank you.
Corey, you mentioned the,
Sorry, yes, it's approved in the budget.
you mentioned the union now, not, okay.
Yeah.
Folks that are compensated at higher than what the study may come back with, as aligning them with market, right? In the non-union side, were there any salaries that are above the market?
Yes,
And then those will not receive the COLAs until they, as the same way you're explaining?
yes.
Sorry, I do think comparing this to like this compared to what, right? So we are very much trying to be proactive. It is, we used to be in a position where we would be out of labor agreements for multiple years, and then you would see retro payments come through. So and that's a big cost too, right? So now we're caught up, we're proactively locked in. I think there's always gonna be some amount of union folks who are unhappy with their contracts, some amount of non-union folks who are unhappy with their arrangement, and there's gonna be some who are less unhappy, but it is confrontational. And then one thing that's different is some of the political positions previously, when there was a pay raise done, the ordinance had multiple years of COLAs built in, and then that stopped. So I do think the more we proactively plan, the better. So like, it would be my intention to put COLAs into the budget again as a general practice, the same way that the contractual negotiated agreements get budgeted. Because if the money's not in the budget, it's hard to do it. But I do think this is a move toward, like, we've caught up, we are being proactive, that's the best way to be financially, especially. And then some conditions do change. So inflation is a little different now than it was before COVID. So that probably affects the way people will negotiate their pay. But
So I just, I wonder, what's the feasibility of coming into the non-ARPA years, that we're going to be restricted with our budget in so many ways. How do we sustain this?
I mean, I think it's a valid concern. I think it just becomes part of the budgeting process. So this, within the next month or so, the mayor will be presenting the budget to the council. Hello, and and at that point, the council, can determine what is set aside for salaries and what we think is sustainable. And there are a lot of, as there is every budget season, I'm sure, difficult decisions to make. But again, I think it's keeping in mind that we've seen the alternative. It's not just a hypothetical. We've seen the alternative play out of what happens when we go a stretch of years without providing COLAs. We have difficulty recruiting for those positions.
We all agree that we want to
Absolutely.
definitely
Right.
support.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But to Councilor Paniagua and Corey's point, at least, I commend the administration for having these contracts. At least we know what we have to face. We got a budget deficit. We meet with Director Rudd all the time. And some of us, President Hudson and myself, have been on the council when we didn't know what an arbitration award was going to get, what the police or the fire were going to get. And that would have upset our whole budget. And those are some difficult times.
Right.
So at least that's why I mentioned that opening these contracts, it's important that we know what we have to face the fiscal year, which will start, July 1st.
I also have two things to question. Excuse my ignorance with the whole process. The first thing is, what is the process when it comes to the contract negotiations? Between the administration and the unions, and within that contract negotiation, what the unions were asking was the needs met below or above or in the middle of what they were asking for, and that's what I would like to know.
Yeah, the process by which the contract negotiation happens is there's, a group of folks from the administration. I'm involved Frank Kaliva's involved, representatives from HR. Sometimes we'll have leadership from the department in there. You know, Commissioner Robinson was part of some negotiations, SPD leadership, the fire department, and meet with the unions. You know, there's always attorneys in the room, almost always. And they present proposals, and we present proposals, and we kind of exchange and go back and forth, negotiate. There's always no side of the table is ever going to get everything that they want. So, you know, so to say, did they get everything that they wanted, or did they get everything that they needed? You know, what I can say is there's a lot of negotiations that go back and forth. Not everybody, not anybody in that room gets everything that they wanted, but at the end of the day, we shake hands, we agree on a contract, it goes to the union for their membership to vote on, it comes before the council to get your approval, and if it passes, it's the document that we all agreed on.
My question is going to Rick. Rick, what has this raises have done to the attrition rate / turnover? Has it improved it at all? Are we able to?
Without a system to accurately track that, just based on visuals, I would say absolutely it's increased. My office, for example, is will be at full staff shortly, and we've in the 3 years, going on 3 years that I've been here, haven't been able to hit that point. So I'm sure a lot of different offices can speak to that, but looking at it, yes, it is fixing attraction. Our job postings are attracting more and more positions, or more and more applicants, so those are on the rise compared to what they were when I started. But visually, yes, I would say. And soon we'll have a system to track it.
The people that are already here, they're not leaving in the rate that they were.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. The mass exodus has slowed down.
Thank you. I do have one last question, and of course, the floor is open. In reading the article in the paper that came out, it mentions that if indeed the study moves forward, which probably most likely it will, the union have no say in the elements that will be part of that study. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, as we're embarking on the compensation study, which again, just to lay the groundwork, is not unheard of, but unusual for what is essentially the management side of the table to fund a compensation study for the labor side of the table, but we're prepared to do it. And in the spirit of transparency, we disclose.
Good, I'm glad you got it.
You got it? I looked it up.
I thought you were inoculated against it.
I've got it in a sheet of paper, the definition right here in my pocket. Carry it with me always. In the spirit of transparency, we shared with the union that this is not a wage study. It doesn't look strictly at wages. It will look at compensation.
Okay, not to cut you off.
Yeah.
But see, there's two different words.
Yes.
You said
Right.
compensation and wage study,
Yes.
two different things.
Correct.
So clarify for me.
Correct. So the wage is your hourly wage, what you get paid each hour to do work. The compensation will look at other elements.
Package.
So, you know, that were not relevant for the non-union compensation study. Non-union employees are not eligible for sick leave incentives or receive uniform allowances or things of that nature that, again, it's not meant to be punitive, but we will share with the consultant, whoever that person might be, the labor contracts, which enumerates, you know, the things that go into compensation. Again, these are things in the contracts. It's things that the administration agreed to, so we're not begrudging anybody having these, but, you know, we need to make sure that we're finding a true, you know, equivalent to these positions. And, you know, if we find out that, and again, these are decisions that the consultant will make. If they say, hey, a uniform allowance of such and such is a standard in the market, so
every department is different with those allowances.
So each union is different with those
Each union
allowances.
is
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes there are some positions that vary by position. So not every single non-union position in the city has a uniform allowance, but certain positions do. Or they might not all get tool allowances, or they don't all have sick leave incentives, but each union.
So then this study will see each union separately?
So they will look at the position. They will look at the specific position and what the compensation is for that position. Again, these are things that were not relevant for non-union employees because those elements are not part of employment and for the non-union employees. So, I mean, it's not meant to be punitive. We just wanted to be transparent as we head down this road to say, this is the information that we would provide to the consultant that looks at compensation overall and not just wages, you know, and we shared our benefit information with the consultant for non-union employees. So, you know, it just seems, we're looking, and again, for non-union employees, it's always been a compensation study. It was never just a wage study. And so we are.
And there will be a breach of communication on how we're going to get to wherever it is we need to get.
Correct.
Corey, for union as an entity, have they done anything like that at all?
A compensation study?
Yes.
Not to my knowledge. I will say certain unions, you know, I know PBA in the past during negotiations that I've been involved with have come with, this is what Rochester makes, this is what Buffalo makes, this is what DeWitt makes, you know, to try and provide, they generally come to the team with wages. And the management team looks at the compensation. So sure, Rochester's entry-level salary might be higher, you know, than ours, but as it turns out, they pay 3 times as much for health insurance. And so, you know, and that's, I'm only talking specifically to PBA because I believe that's generally where compensation and looking at other municipalities has come in to play, at least the negotiations I've been involved in. And so they're looking at the wages, which, you know, I fully understand why PBA would do that. We come back with, okay, but we're looking at compensation. So they pay more for health insurance. They, you know, have fewer days off. And so that's how we've approached it with PBA. But to my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that there has been, you know, a comprehensive compensation information provided in contract negotiations outside of PBA.
And I take other cities have not done that either.
Yeah.
CSEA.
Oh, yeah, CSEA, yeah.
CSEA did.
We did spend time restructuring CSEA's contract, but again, and we did that collectively. It was CSEA and management, and we put together a spreadsheet that showed if we achieve these goals, the levels of compensation are going to vary over the contract. So this person's going to go up 6% over the life of the contract. This person's going to go up 17% in terms of compensation. CSEA ultimately decided not to go that route and went with an across-the-board wage increase, which is fully their decision to make.
Any other questions? Anybody? No? Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Council.
Thanks, Corey.
Oh, okay. We need to go to dinner then. You think? Kevin, did we resolve?